Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. In this video, we're going to do a bunch of work to FrankenNova. So the last time you saw FrankenNova, it still had the 350 in it that I built originally for this car. And since then, I have upgraded it to a new motor, new transmission, and fuel injection. Now I know you're thinking the car only had about 15 passes on it. Pretty much everything was brand new. Why in the world would you change the entire drivetrain? Well, I didn't change the rear, but I'll explain. So I got this car ready. I was going to get it ready to go to Rocky Mountain Raceweek. And like 2 or 3 weeks before Rocky Mountain Raceweek, I decided, you know what? I need to check the fluid in the pan and make sure I'm not going to have transmission problems. It had a Turbo 400 in it that was a reverse manual valve body that had been built like 20 years ago. Well, I was kind of worried about it, so I pulled the pan off and I found a whole bunch of clutch material, and the transmission was smoked. Well, I had already built a 383 for Rocky Mountain Raceweek, so the car would be more competitive. Now, I was hoping that it would anyway. Since I knew that the transmission had some issues, I went ahead and pulled the motor and transmission together and was going to put the new 383 in. I was going to fix the transmission, but since the car had 0 street miles on it, I was really afraid to just take it and drive it around through the Rocky Mountains. That transmission has no engine braking with a reverse manual valve body, and I wasn't sure how that was going to work, especially if my wife wanted to drive the car or I needed her to drive the car. I didn't want to have to worry about constantly shifting gears back and forth because I can handle it, even though it wouldn't be that much fun, but I wasn't really sure she wanted to have to deal with that. So I decided that I was going to switch to a Turbo 350. I was like, hey, I've got a nice core that's in pretty good shape. It was in a running and driving car. I'll pull that apart. I'll throw the stuff together myself real quick since I've already built one for the budget Nova, and it should work just fine. Well, here it is on a pile of stuff that hasn't moved since I pretty much got done with it. The problem was I had to finish this when I got back from Rocky Mountain Raceweek because trying to put it together, I cut 3 different lip seals trying to put the direct drum together and got frustrated. So running out of time, couldn't find anyone local that could build me one in the time frame I needed because I was only like a week and a half away from having to leave for Rocky Mountain Raceweek. I went to Summit and just bought a TCI Street Fighter transmission. Paid a lot for it, so I hope it still does pretty good for a while. But I put a TCI converter in there because you have to use a TCI converter to keep their warranty. If I figured if I was going to have any chance of having any problems, I wanted to maximize my chances of being able to warranty the transmission. I also figured that I was going to go ahead and switch it to fuel injection because I was going to have everything out and do all that stuff. I might as well put the Holly Terminator kit that I bought for this thing 2 years ago. Now, it had been sitting in the box and the wiring on this car still wasn't finished. I had headlights and I had ignition, and that was about it. So with basically only 2 weeks left to pretty much wire the car, change the motor, change the transmission, and swap it to fuel injection, I decided not to film any of it just because it takes a lot longer to film stuff when you got to keep moving the camera around and making sure you're saying the right stuff. So none of that is actually on a video. The good news is I was able to make that happen. So with 10 minutes of runtime on the new engine, 1 trip around the block, we loaded up the car on the trailer and headed to Kearney, Nebraska. Now, the reason it only had 10 minutes of runtime on there is because that's all I had time to do. Plus, it's a hydraulic roller cam motor, so I didn't need to break the cam in. Now, I would have liked to have had some runtime on the engine and more on the transmission, but it went into gear, it drove around the block, it seemed to have a little bit of power, so I figured the tune would figure itself out, or I would figure it out, or get someone to figure it out while we were at race week. So that's what we did and headed west. All right, we made it to the hotel. It's about 12:30 Kearney time in Nebraska. That took a lot longer than we planned. We were on the road. Well, I took a couple of naps because I've only had like 5 or 6 hours of sleep in 3 days. So we stopped a couple of times, took a nap, and we're here. I've got a few issues with the car to fix. The horn doesn't work, and that has to work. And I did get the front turn signals to work, except for when the lights are on. So the rear ones work with the lights on, the front ones do not. So it's picking up a ground. It's trying to use the park light as a ground, and that's not working. So it works when the lights are off, but it doesn't work when the headlights are on. So I'm going to have to figure out why it's not grounding. I'll figure that out, not a big deal. So we got to make the horn work, and I got to get a neutral safety switch hooked up. But first I got to do is get some rest. So we'll see you guys in the morning. So we made it to Kearney, Nebraska. Took us a little bit longer than we planned, but we got there. I had a few things to do to the car, obviously, and didn't finish it all before we left. I still had to bolt the passenger seat in, and I had to finish the wiring, basically because the horn didn't work, and also my turn signals did not work with the headlights on. They worked unless the headlights were on. Without the headlights on, they did not work. So had to figure that out. I got up early in the morning the next day, got that figured out, and then we headed to the track. So we made it to Kearney. Took us longer than we thought. Still had some stuff to do to the car. Got that figured out the next morning, and we headed to the track, and that's where I screwed up because I left my laptop at the hotel. With having a brand new EFI on the car and zero pretty much runtime as far as drive time, there was no way this thing was going to learn what I needed it to learn just driving around the pits at the track. So my buddy Matt Cartwright come over and let me borrow his computer and try to start some kind of little bit of a tune in it, and we went up to make a pass. All right, so hopefully it's not too windy for you to hear what I'm saying, because it's pretty windy up here. We are at Rocky Mountain Raceweek, trying not to talk over the announcer, and we got FrankenNova ready to run. Got the sticker on it that my wife did for me. Got a tune in it because I've swapped this thing over to Terminator EFI, and I've got some gauges in it, so it's still a little rough looking. But yeah, we got it set up, ready to go. So it's now got a 383 in it with some AFR heads, big fat camshaft, probably a 3/4, something like that. And we're gonna go make a pass. Now this thing has like 10 minutes of runtime on it, maybe, well, probably about 30 minutes now, but no really driving on it. I drove it around the block at home, did a little blip in the, little bit of a burnout in the driveway at home, and drove it on the trailer, off the trailer, and I've driven it around the track here a few times, but really nowhere to get up to speed, so I don't know what it's going to do. So my first pass is going to be pretty easy of a pass. I'm not going to hammer on it at all. I'm going to do the burnout, see how it feels, and then we'll make a little bit of a pass, see how the car does. So good luck, right? Okay, so the first run was like a 1360 or 70, something like that, and I didn't lead very hard, and I didn't wind it all the way up. I just didn't make a hard try at trying to make a good pass because I really wasn't sure what the car was going to do. So I went around, made some adjustments to the tune, made another pass after that one. My second pass I left a lot harder, got up on the converter as hard as I could, and it launched really hard, like pulled the tires up a little bit, wrinkled the tires, left really good, and then it laid over right before I shifted into second gear. Which sucks because that's the same problem I was having before with FrankenNova, and now I had changed the motor and transmission and fuel system and was still having the same issue. But at least I had a data log that I could look at and tell me what was going on with the engine. And it was going lean, not bad, but just a little bit lean, and I couldn't figure out why. But made some more adjustments, went up, made a third pass, which would be my last pass for the night, and was able to get it close enough. And again, keep in mind, I'm borrowing someone else's laptop the whole time, and that's aggravating just because I hate asking. I'm kind of prideful, and when other people got other stuff they're doing, and I've got to go over there and borrow their stuff to work with, it sucks. But I made it happen, turned in a 1330 or something like that pass, and I was pretty heartbroken because with this new engine I really should have been a couple seconds faster. I mean, I didn't know if there was going to be 2 seconds worth of tuning in it. I was pretty upset, but we went back to the hotel and got it the next morning and went to head from Kearney, Nebraska to Denver, and we had a couple of checkpoints, and this is where things started going wrong because a lot of stuff that I thought I filmed didn't show up. The files were corrupt. So I got a lot of footage that didn't show up, and I got some footage that did. Well, then I burned a couple spark plug wires because my passenger or driver's side header was kind of close with these heads. With the other heads it wasn't bad, but with these AFR heads, the spark plug location changed just enough to where I was all over the spark plug with one of the headers. And now that pulley won't come off without the fan and radiator coming out. Now when I say I burned a couple of spark plug wires, I mean like 6. So it was 420 miles, 425 miles from Kearney to where we were going in Denver to Bandimere. And we made it to somewhere, Longmont, Longmire, Longhorn, something like that. Can't remember the name of it. And one of the checkpoints there, we made it there. Really, other than burning the spark plug wires and the car, my throttle cable started sticking a little bit. You know, really made it there without any issues. We get to the checkpoint, and I noticed I hit a bump, and I noticed that I had a lot of sound coming from the rear end, and that was not good. So I pulled over, looked at everything on the trailer, thought maybe the trailer had come loose. That wasn't it. Turned out my drum brakes had come apart on the passenger rear. So when I pulled the drum off, everything hit the ground. Shoes, all the springs chewed up, everything. So I was able to find a ride from a road weaker named Homer, and he was able to get me to an auto parts store that just happened to have an entire brake hardware kit that I needed. I didn't need new drums. I just needed the spring and, you know, all hardware kit that goes in the drum brakes. So I was able to get the drum brakes fixed, but the problem was it had taken so long by the time we got there and got the brakes fixed. I actually had to do it twice. I fixed it, went down the road a few miles, and it started making noise again. Had to take it back apart, and I had one of the springs on wrong. Had to watch my own video to remember how I put the springs on. But I was frustrated, so that's my excuse. We got the brakes on. We ended up getting a hotel room there instead of driving through the canyon the next day, or driving through the canyon at night, and decided to drive through the canyon the next day. That way we didn't have to do it in the dark and worry about getting lost and missing all of the scenery. So we drove through the next day instead of that night, which turned out to be a really good idea, because the next day in broad daylight we followed the directions wrong and we got lost in the mountains. All right, so we're lost. Throttle cable sticking. We're in the mountains. There's no cell phone service. This sucks. But I've got a throttle cable, so I'm going to swap that out real quick. That'll make it easier to maneuver, drive through here to find out where we're going. There's no air. Car runs like crap. Doesn't make any power. Did I mention we were lost? Because we're lost. And we've tried to flag down a couple of people, and they think we're maniacs, so they're not going to stop for somebody as ugly as me in a rusted out 74 Nova pulling a trailer. So we are going to change the throttle cable. I'm going to go over there and piss in the woods or something. I don't know. But anyway, we're going to change the throttle cable and keep going. All right. Try to get my throttle cable replaced. I brought an extra one with me. I had a lot of problems with this thing when I first took this car to the drag strip, and I put this, well, not this cable, but the one laying there. I put that one on there, and it started acting up on the drive yesterday, so now we're trying to get going. All right, so I got the throttle cable changed. We're going to head back down the mountain for the second time. Well, first time in this direction, second time in the other direction, and go back. So hopefully we'll find the road we're looking for and get to Denver. So we finally make it to Bandimere, get everything set up, get the car switched over from street trim to race trim, you know, basically throwing the slicks on it. And I had a drive tune and a race tune, and now I have my laptop with me, so everything's going to be great, right? Yeah, wrong. I clicked off a blistering 14-second pass at Bandimere. Now, I knew Bandimere was going to be a tough place because the altitude is way higher, but at this point I was pretty much distraught because I had spent a few $1,000s and I was going 2 seconds slower. Now, I didn't expect it to run, you know, great at Bandimere because, Usually that place is anywhere from half a second to a whole second slower on an NA car just because of the altitude. So I was expecting it to be slower, but geez, not quite that slow. So we leave Bandimere. The next day we drive to Pueblo to race at Pueblo. Car did great on the drive. I did some reading, figured out what might be going on with my tune, about tuning for altitude. And then we get to Pueblo. I put in my new tune, and on the first pass I knew as soon as I launched, really I knew as soon as I did my burnout, that something was different. It felt a lot better. My first pass I ripped off a 1279, I think, 1279 or 1289. So I knew things were getting better in a hurry. And what I had figured out was that at altitude there's a lot less air. Well, since my fuel injection was running off a map sensor, here in Georgia, when I first kind of set the engine to learn, my map sensor was reading in KPA, it reads in KPA, and mine was reading like right at 100, 101, something like that, with the engine off and the key on. However, at Pueblo it was reading 82, and that is a lot less air than what we have here. So my whole tune was in the wrong spot, so to speak. It was nowhere near where it needed to be, so I dropped my whole tune down in KPA, and that's when it ran the 1289 or whatever it was. So then I went back to the pits and made some more adjustments, and for the night at Pueblo, the first night at Pueblo, ended up turning in a 1250 something, 1251 or something, 1250 something like that. Now we had 2 days at Pueblo, so the second day I think I turned in a 1240 something. So still down in the 12, still playing with the tune a little bit, but I was still getting a pretty good stumble, anything over about 5,500 RPM, and something was going on with it, and it was breaking up, laying over kind of deal. Not really breaking up, but more laying over. So still had that to deal with. Couldn't figure that out, but the car was running a lot better, so I was pretty happy. We get back to Kearney to finish the race and burn a couple more plug wires, but I had already put some heat shield on some of my plug wires, so it wasn't burning them quite as fast or as often. So I was able to run the track pretty good. It really only did it when I did a lot of street driving. That's the only time it really started burning plug wires, was driving on the street. So we made it back to Kearney, which was another 400 and something miles from Pueblo. It's a little bit farther from Pueblo to Kearney than it was from Kearney to Denver, because you're a little bit south of Denver. We went through Kansas, had a good time. The car did good other than burning a couple of wires. I had fixed the broken throttle cable back in the mountains, so it was just doing a whole lot better. However, not broken throttle cable, but the sticking throttle cable. So we get back to Kearney, which was another 425 miles. Car had done really well. We get back, and I don't have to do anything to the car except for check the oil and fluids and all that stuff. Everything looks good. Car made it 1,300 miles with really no engine issues other than burning plug wires. My tune left a lot to be desired, but you know, I'm a carburetor guy, and I switched to EFI, so the carburetor, you just add jets and maybe some air bleeds or something, so it's a little bit less involved. It'll adjust itself for the air other than just jets. And fuel injection wasn't doing that, so I figured out a few more things. Now we're at a lower altitude. When we're back in Kearney, we were at a lower altitude, so I figured it was going to run a little bit better, but wasn't sure how much. Well, on the last day, your average time is already turned in. As long as you make it back, that'll be your average that all your runs you turned in over the week. So the only thing you have on the last day is a bracket race. So the car was doing pretty good. I figured I might go around in the bracket race. And I did. In the first pass, I went down there and ran a 12:26, I think. So it was doing a lot better. Well, second round came up, and 60 foot was better. It picked the tires up a little bit. It was pretty good. It didn't lay over as much, but I was way ahead of the other car. I was afraid I was going to break out, because that's kind of how bracket racing works. You can't go too fast over your dial in. So I let off, but the 8th mile times and all the other stuff looked like it was going to be, 12-10, 12-15, something like that. It was all about a 10th better than the previous pass. When on the third round, I red lit and short shifted it, and I went and put it on the trailer. So I'm pretty happy that the car made it a little over 1,300 miles with no issues on the engine whatsoever. I mean, other than burning some plug wires and my tune not being right, a car that I built, other than the transmission this time, a car that I built, the whole car, wiring, suspension, I built the rear end, I built the motor, made it 1,300 something miles of me beating the snot out of it. Now, this thing has a 410 gear in it, and we were going 60, 65 mile an hour a lot, and this thing was running 3,500 RPM. So it was screaming the whole time. So now you're wondering, why are you taking it out if nothing's wrong with it? Well, I got it back here to Georgia and took it down the drag strip a few times, and still have the laying over issue, which I think I figured out. But it ran a 1205 here at 114. Now, I went to do a fluid change on it. I pulled the oil filter apart, and I've got some glitter in the oil filter. Very, very small amount. And I've already pulled the distributor out, and the distributor gear started getting chewed up, and it was not fully engaged in the camshaft. So I'm pulling this out to check bearings, check everything, just to make sure none of that got anywhere, and make sure everything's okay. Just kind of a go through before we go back to Rocky Mountain Raceweek 2.0 back in the mountains. So I want to make sure this thing is okay and figure out why we have glitter in the oil. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put this on a stand real quick, dump it over, put water all over the floor, probably some oil too, and then we're going to figure out what's going on with the bearings, make sure they look okay. So since my distributor was not engaged all the way into the gear, and you can see we're chewing up really low on the distributor, and also the oil pump drive was not engaged as much as it should have been, I looked at the other motor that came out of FrankenNova. I had a different distributor in there. Everything was different. The only thing that was that was in both motors was this intake. So I went back and looked at the MSD distributor that I pulled out of FrankenNova, and it had the same pattern. That wasn't chewed up, but it had the same pattern at the very bottom of the distributor gear. Now I'm not sure if the camera is going to be able to focus on it, but this distributor gear is out of the new motor, and I'm not sure at the bottom of the teeth, which is down here, I'm not sure if you can see what's chewed up or not, but I'm not sure you can see it on the, yeah, right there you can see it. See, the bottom's chewed up, and in some spots it's chewed up way worse than others. What I'm thinking is, since this intake was on both engines and everything else was different, I'm wondering if this isn't up too high. So I'm going to take this intake off, set it on the bench, and I'm going to check it against a couple other intakes I have and see if the distributor height is different. And if it is different, I've got two options. I can go get another intake, which is probably what I'll do, and then check it also. Or I could put a distributor on with an adjustable collar. I'm not a big fan of those. If you don't have to run one, I'm not a big fan of them, just because I've had one come loose before. I mean, maybe I did something wrong, and they're probably better now, but a long time ago. But either way, we're going to get this intake off. We're going to check it against another one, and then we're going to go through the motor and check and make sure there's nothing that is pretty hard metal. It's melanized gear, so it's hardened steel. So we're going to check it and make sure that nothing got in the motor, got in the bearings, and ate anything up. All right, so got got the motor apart mostly. Some of it's still together. It's all bad news. All bad news. So I flipped it over, pulled one of the main caps off, and there was debris in the bearing. That's not good. Pulled another main cap off, more debris, and the bearing looked a little worse. All the rods look okay. The rod bearings look okay, but the mains were crap. So I'm not sure if I definitely had some debris in there, and that could have been from the distributor or the cam or whatever. But the real problem is that I scuffed all my pistons, and I'm not sure if this is going to show up really good, but I scuffed all my pistons and my cylinders walls up really good. So I'm having some pistons overnighted. We're going to bore the block, and then we're going to go put everything back together. New bearings, new rings, new pistons, and yeah, we're running out of time to get this thing ready for race week. So I'm not going to get a lot of testing done, and I'm probably not going to make the No Name Nationals now because of this crap, which is kind of bumming me out. But one of the other things I was going to do, I was going to take the motor from that used to be in FrankenNova, put it back in here and use that motor. However, I flipped it over, and excuse my junk pile over here. I pulled this main cap, and this main cap is not tight in the registers anymore. So as soon as I loosen up the bolts, the cap just pulled out. That's not supposed to happen. They're supposed to be fairly tight in the registers, and it was not, which that's no bueno. So plus some of the bearings on that had debris in them, but I know what that's from, and it's not yeah. So my options were to start with a new block, and the only one I have available at the moment is a 2-bolt, or go buy a dart block, and I didn't want to do that. Or I could bore this one out, and now the pistons are still okay. They're scuffed up a little bit, but they're fine. The rings are iffy, but new rings, new pistons. Gonna have to rebalance the rotating assembly and bore and hone the block again. But we're gonna be ready. We're gonna get this thing going. So let's get this thing apart, get it to the machine shop early in the morning tomorrow morning, so that my buddy can start working on it for me. And then I'm gonna start cleaning it up so I can get this thing ready. And I still have to change. The reason I was taking the motor out in the first place, before I decided to, hey, let's look at the oil filter, was because I'm changing that steering box. Now that's a power steering box, and I've just got it looped. And driving through the Rocky Mountains with that like that was not fun at all. It was kind of, I thought driving it, or very little, like I said, I drove it around the block once. I'd driven it at the drag strip, seemed fine. Until you started actually going down the road and having to go through mountain corners and stuff like that, it was not fine anymore. So I pulled the motor up to change that and to fix this header, because I burned all the spark plug wires, because right there's not enough room for the spark plug. The spark plug was real close right there. So I'm going to have to hammer that in, dent it a little bit, and see if I can get more clearance for the plug boot without touching. And it probably won't be a problem to do that, but I couldn't do it in the car. There's no room to get down there. So I knew I had to pull the motor up to get the header out, and I had to pull the header out to get the gearbox changed. So I figured I would go ahead and, while I had to pull the motor kind of halfway loose, let's check the oil filter, make sure there's no issues. And now we're here rebuilding the motor, which sucks, because you know, those are nice pistons that I can't use in this block anymore, and still going back with some nice pistons, but you know, it sucks to have $1,000 set of pistons that you can't use. So it'll be back better than ever, I hope, and maybe it'll still have time to get on the dyno before we go back to Rocky Mountain Raceweek. Just depends when all this gets done. But we won't have burning spark plug wires. I've got a brand new manual gearbox and pitman arm, because you have to match the pitman arm with the gearbox, and I've got a brand new rag joint for the manual box, because they're different apparently. The shafts or splines are different. So I've got my transmission being held up so I can roll the car out of the way, back my truck in here, and get the motor loaded up after I get the balancer off, get the cam out, get the crank out, and get the rods and pistons out on this side first. Then I can take the cam and crank out. But yeah, let's get to work. Valve covers are on, the intake's on, balancer's on, fuel pump block off is on. I've got my oil filter bypass eliminator, whatever the thing that does away with the oil filter bypass in there. It's a little billet oil filter adapter. I got my oil pressure fitting in because that's kind of hard to put in. It's not really hard to put in, it's just hard to get a wrench on and tighten it up a little bit. So I got that in there ready to go. I got my lift plate on, distributor hole blocked off. I also have, since my other one, I've got a serious mess here, as you can tell. I put some, I don't know if you can see it in the picture, I put some blue Dicam on my distributor gear, and I checked the engagement on the distributor, and it's way better than the last one, so that's good. Now all I've got to do is clean up a bunch of this crap, change my steering box real quick. I've already got my header clearanced. I'm going to change my steering box, take the power steering box off, put a manual box on, and then I can drop the engine back in here, get it off the stand, put the flex plate on, drop it in here, start hooking everything back up, and hopefully get it running, because this is Monday and we're leaving for race week in 2 days. Well, we're leaving Thursday night, so and I've got to work every day, so I can't afford to lose any time, not any more than I already have. All right, I'm a mess. My shop is a mess. The car's kind of a mess, but everything's back in, and I'm exhausted. I'm aggravated because some things didn't go as well as I planned on them to be. Got the new manual steering box in there. Now my steering wheel's upside down because I wasn't paying attention. It is centered. I got equal number of turns left to right. So I got that part right, but I did not get the steering wheel is upside down. So I'll pull it off sometime between now and Pueblo and flip it over. Won't be a big deal. I'm gonna turn my fuel system on. Turn the computer on. I got to switch for the computer. Turn the computer on, pressurize the fuel system, see if I've got any leaks on the fuel system, and after I don't have any leaks, then we'll see if it'll crank up. System. I even checked the fuel lines back at the tank just to be sure, and I primed it with my oil pump primer earlier, so we'll see. Coil's on, starter wire's hooked up, I got water in it, I got oil in it, alternator's hooked up, throttle body's hooked up, coolant sensor, fuel pressure, oil pressure, water temperature, all that's hooked up. And hopefully I got my distributor close enough. So now we're gonna get in here and see if it fires up. Doesn't want to idle, but it's running. Alright, so it's the next day. I was worried I wasn't getting oil up to the top end, and I was. It was fine. Just me being paranoid. I was getting oil. I was worried I wasn't getting enough. I am. So I stayed up real late last night, checking everything, looking over everything. It's fine. Sounds good. Runs good. I had an exhaust leak. This header wasn't tight all the way. Had to fix that. Now it cranks up. Sounds really good when it's running. Got good throttle response. So my tune is probably kind of close. The only thing different really is the heads and the pistons. So everything same valve train, shorter push rods because the heads were a little bit different. The Cam's the same. Everything's pretty much the same combination. Better heads. Went from the AFR Enforcer heads to the AFR 195 heads that are CNC. So that should be a lot more power because it's double the price. It's double the power, right? Yeah. It's not. It doesn't work that way. Anyway, now I have to tighten I forgot to tighten my rag joint on the steering box, my coupler. I need to tighten that. I need to tighten my pitman arm. I think it's already tight, but I need to check it. It's kind of hard to tighten that without it on the car. So I need to check that, put a cotter pin in my center link that attaches to the pitman arm, and because that is tight, I just need to add the cotter pin. Go over the car, do a nut and bolt check, and then tomorrow we're going to get on the way to Rocky Mountain Raceweek. So I still have a lot to do. I have to clean up the shop. I have to get the blue car in. I have to get the Henry J in the shop. Close the doors. And anyway, my daughter and stuff will be here, so not worried about it. Got a lot to do. I'm going to show you guys. I've got my shelf over here full of, this is all stuff that I'm taking to Raceweek. I've got a wiring kit. I've got ponchos, Ziploc bags, a trash bag. I don't know why, but my wife thought it was a good idea, and it'll probably be what saves us somewhere. A bunch of electrical connectors. I've got all new wheel bearings, lug nuts, wheel studs. I've got a box full of that. Extra spark plug wires, extra module, extra nuts and bolts, extra shifter cable. That will come in handy. I've got my timing light, extra radiator hoses. The upper one, probably you could find something close enough to work. The lower one's kind of a pain, and this is not a stock radiator, so that makes a big difference. And then I also have another set of axles over here that already have new C-clip eliminators. You're going to get to see some of my messy shop. So the old intake, the Brodix intake I was going to use, but I went and bought an RPM air gap. You can see where I've been doing some porting on some other heads. I've got these brand new axles with a roller bearing, or I'm sorry, a tapered bearing C-clip eliminator that are supposed to be better for street driving. Now, I don't have time to change. I was going to change them out. I pressed them on there, got them ready to go, and I ran out of time. Because when you have money, you don't have time. When you have time, you don't have money. If you have both of them together, it's usually a week before the event. That's how you get to right here. Yeah, so we got a lot to do. All right, it's late. I'm tired. Car's pretty much ready now. I still have to put the seal plates in. I had those out working on some wiring. I've still got to change my harness to my new one because my one's out of date, and trip and fall over something before I leave. I've got all my spare parts pretty much ready to go. I've got some oil, rear end fluid, brake fluid, some grease, spare push rods, module, tons of gaskets, gaskets for the axle C-clip eliminators that I'm taking that are spares, all my electrical stuff, like I said, like I showed you, hoses and stuff. I've got my tools pretty much packed up. I've got some mishmash stuff. I've got my stuff I'm going to grab the most on top, like a 1/2 inch 9/16, a couple of extensions, regular ratchet screwdrivers, stuff like that on top, spark plug sockets. The rest of it's in here. I'm going to set that on there, and now we're good to go. I've got some DeWalt stuff, light, batteries, jack stands, torque wrench, bunch of sockets, harmonic balancer tools in case somebody else needs them. I'm hoping I don't need any of that. Those are my spare axles with the other C-clip eliminators. And yeah, so I think we're ready. We're going to find out. So we're going to hit the road tomorrow afternoon. I've got a lot of cleaning up to do tomorrow. I got to clean up the shop a little bit, get some other cars in here, and lock up the gate. So it's going to be an interesting drive out there. It's 23 hours the way we're going to go, and pulling a trailer, it's probably going to take us a lot longer than 23 hours. So, and I'll probably stop and take a nap, stuff like that. We will not drive it straight through. We'll stop somewhere and take a nap. So see you guys there.